Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, we're going to be continuing our season preview series, this time taking a look at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And for the Blue Bombers, coming off a third straight Grey Cup appearance, ultimately ending in disappointment, losing to the Toronto Argonauts last season. An excellent season overall, still though, 15-3 record, just a juggernaut regular season team. And they were able to keep a lot of that core together for another season. So I'm very excited to see what they have in store for 2023, and let's talk about them. So in terms of their offseason additions, their biggest one for sure, and pretty much the only major one they did, was bringing in wide receiver Kenny Lawler from the Edmonton Elks. This was such a big addition in my opinion. I think that if they had Kenny Lawler out there on the field against the Argonauts last Grey Cup, I think they probably win because they really struggled to get that offense going in that game, and I think Lawler really gave them that extra gear the year before in that comeback effort against Hamilton. So I think that going forward, with Lawler back in the fold after that 1 year away in Edmonton, it's going to make a big difference to that whole offense. You're not going to be able to double anybody because you have three really good receiving targets there in Lawler, Dembski, and obviously Dalton Schoen as well. So I think that Lawler addition is so huge for this team. Now, in terms of their biggest loss this offseason, I think it is center Michael Couture, who they lose to the BC Lions. I think that Couture has been a really solid player they've developed over the years there in Winnipeg and has really developed into a very, very sturdy starter at the center position. So I'm very interested to see how they fill that void going forward. They have Chris Kolankowski, who did a pretty good job in filling into that role last year when Couture was hurt. But at the end of the day, I don't think he's a better player than Couture, so we'll see how that works out for them going forward if that interior offensive line starts to become an issue for them. But overall, they didn't really lose too many key pieces from last year's team, just mainly Couture. Now let's turn and talk about their roster, starting with the offense, which I have ranked as the second best offense in the CFL. I think it's a great offense, brings back a lot of continuity. Obviously, you have Zach Collaros still as the undisputed best quarterback in the CFL going into this season. I think the running back room, not the most special one in the world. That receiver room, I really like. I think it is the best receiving room in the CFL. But the big change for me, it's not really a huge change, but in previous years, I had their offensive line ranked as the best offensive line in the CFL, but this year I have them ranked as number 2 because I really like one other unit in the league better. So that's really what forces them down to the number 2 spot, whereas they were the number 1 spot the last couple of seasons for me in terms of offense. Where they do rank first, though, is defense. You can't really say enough about the experience that this defense brings to the table at all 3 levels. There's a difference-making player. In terms of the defensive line, you still have Willie Jefferson and Jackson Jeffcoat. Great rush tandem there. At linebacker, you still have Adam Bighill, who's an ageless wonder at that middle linebacker position. And at defensive back, you have Dietrich Nichols, who I think is my number 1 ranked defensive back going into this season. So honestly, they still have impact players at every level of that defense, and it will allow them to be successful going into this season, I do believe. And then in terms of their Canadian talent, I have them ranked as second in the CFL. And again, the story here is the continuity. You know who is going to be penciled into those 7 starting spots. Obviously, Nick Dembski and Drew Wolotarski, 2 Canadian starting receivers there for a number of years for Winnipeg. Jake Thomas at defensive tackle for them, and then 3 spots on the offensive line, as well as the running back position that they start a Canadian at. Having those 7 spots secured going into the season should be huge for Winnipeg. They added a lot of depth at the draft. I think that they added another piece behind Jake Thomas at the defensive line position. They bring in Anthony Bennett in the first round as an edge piece there to maybe rotate in, play that Jonathan Kongbo role, who they lost a couple of years ago to the NFL. So very interested to see how those new look Canadians play for this team this year. But at the end of the day, I think they're very solidified in terms of their starting positions for their Canadians this season. And then in terms of their strengths and weaknesses on this roster, ultimately, I think one of the biggest strengths is obviously the quarterback. Having the best quarterback in the CFL will make a huge difference to any team. So I think having Zach Collaros is going to be a huge advantage for them on a week-to-week basis as long as he stays healthy. The wide receiver room, I think, is going to present a lot of mismatches for teams. Dembski, Lawler, Schoen. I think you're not going to be able to double one of those guys. So it's going to make a big impact for this team this year. And then in general, the front seven on defense has just been such a presence the last couple of seasons, and it's just become so feared around the Canadian Football League. When you're in obvious passing situations, it's very tough to play against this defense, especially that front seven. So I think those are the strengths for this team going into this year. And then in terms of weaknesses, you have to put age up there as a consideration, because these guys, although these guys are superstars, Jackson Jeffcoat, Willie Jefferson, Jamarcus Hardrick, Stanley Bryant, these guys on the edges of the offense and defensive lines, they're superstar players, but they're all up there in age. They're all getting up there into their 30s, and I think that at a certain point that could become a factor. Do they all stay healthy? That's a big question. So at the end of the day, injuries do play a role, and getting up there in age makes you more susceptible to injury. So we'll see how long this Winnipeg core can stay together and stay healthy on that the offensive and defensive line. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out for them this year. And then in general, the run game is a weakness for me. I think that this running back group doesn't present a lot of upside, but at the end of the day, I think the passing game more than makes up for it in that great defense. But just an odd thing, because a couple of years ago when they had Andrew Harris, this was a fine-tuned machine in terms of running the ball, and they were really built around that. So it's interesting to see how they've transformed over the past couple of years. But those are just the strengths and weaknesses for this roster for Winnipeg. Now let's take a look at their schedule to begin the year, starting with Week 1 versus Hamilton. It seems like most years over the past couple of years they played Hamilton in the opening game. They're going to be at home for that one, so they're going to be looking to avenge that big loss that they had at Hamilton last year. So going to be interesting to see how those two teams match up. Week 2, they're at Saskatchewan, which is interesting because in recent years, we haven't seen too many of these big rivalry games in the first couple of weeks of the season. So glad to see that for the CFL, kind of spread those out throughout the season. Week 3, they're home versus BC. New look BC team with Vernon Adams, as we went over the other day. Week 4, they're at Montreal with Cody Fajardo, obviously a new look team there as well. And then Week 5, they're home versus Calgary. Always great matchups between the Stampeders and Blue Bombers we've seen the past couple of seasons. So excited to see how Winnipeg begins the year. I think it's a very manageable slate for them, even though there are some really good teams in there. I think a lot depends on how Saskatchewan and Montreal look in the early going of this season. Have they improved a lot, or have they, maintained their current standing from last year? So I think it's a manageable schedule to begin the year for Winnipeg, and I'm excited to see how they do to begin the season. Now, ultimately, in terms of predictions, again, like I said in the first video of this series, I'm not going to be doing an official, this is the record that this team's going to finish with. I'm just going to give you a win range for these teams. And for Winnipeg, I think they're going to finish between 11 and 14 wins. I think the floor is super high for this team, given all the CFL experience that they have and they bring to the table. The only thing I can see them finishing below 11 wins is if they have some major injuries. Zach Collaros misses a lot of time, which is possible given his career history, but recent history shows that he has stayed healthy. So I'm excited to see what happens with this team this year. Be sure to let me know if you guys think they're going to go back to the Grey Cup for the 4th straight time. Are they going to win it for the 3rd time in 4 years? Be sure to let me know. And with that said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.